At 28, Sofia Chen had already learned that life's greatest victories often came disguised as devastating defeats. Standing in her custom-designed penthouse office overlooking Manhattan's financial district, she could still remember the exact words her stepsister had spat at her 3 years ago. "You'll die poor and alone, just like your pathetic mother." What Victoria didn't know then was that her cruel betrayal would lead Sofia directly into the arms of the one man who could give her everything she'd ever dreamed of and more. But before she reveals how stealing her boyfriends became the best thing that ever happened to her, let's dive into the story that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sofia's childhood had been a masterclass in resilience wrapped in designer clothing and private school tuition that her stepfather grudgingly paid. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Westchester County, she learned early that money couldn't buy acceptance, especially when you were the outsider disrupting someone else's perfect family portrait. Her mother, Elena Chen, had been a brilliant software engineer who immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but a computer science degree and unshakable determination. Elena met Sofia's father, David, during her first year working at a tech startup in Silicon Valley. Their love story was brief but intense, ending tragically when David died in a car accident when Sofia was barely 2 years old. Elena, pregnant and grieving, had to rebuild her life from scratch while raising a toddler alone. The early years were tough but filled with love. Elena worked multiple programming contracts while studying for her MBA at night, often bringing Sofia to the university library where she would color quietly in the corner while her mother typed away at her thesis. Those nights taught Sofia the value of education, persistence, and the quiet power of a woman determined to create a better life for her family. Elena's hard work paid off spectacularly. By the time Sofia was 8, her mother had founded her own cybersecurity consulting firm specializing in protecting financial institutions from digital threats. The company, Phoenix Security Solutions, grew rapidly as banks and investment firms desperately needed her expertise. Within 3 years, Elena had built a multi-million-dollar enterprise and caught the attention of Richard Blackwood, a prominent investment banker who managed portfolios for some of New York's wealthiest families. Richard was everything Elena thought she wanted in a partner. Sophisticated, successful, and stable, he represented the security she'd never had. More importantly, he seemed to genuinely care for Sofia, taking her to baseball games and helping with her math homework. When he proposed during Sofia's 12th birthday party, Elena said yes, believing she was giving her daughter the stable family structure she'd always wanted to provide. The wedding was a grand affair held at Richard's family estate in the Hamptons. Sofia, dressed in a pale pink flower girl dress, walked down the aisle scattering rose petals, genuinely excited about gaining not just a stepfather but a stepsister. Victoria Blackwood was exactly Sofia's age, blonde and beautiful in the way that seemed effortless, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question her place in the world. But the fairy tale atmosphere dissolved quickly once the honeymoon period ended. Victoria made it clear from the first week of their blended family life that Sofia was an unwelcome intruder in her perfect world. The subtle cruelties began immediately. Homework assignments mysteriously disappearing, birthday party invitations that somehow never made it to Sofia, and constant corrections about proper etiquette and social graces that Sofia supposedly lacked. Richard, caught between his daughter's passive-aggressive campaign and his new wife's growing concern, chose the path of least resistance. He assured Elena that the girls just needed time to adjust, that sibling rivalry was normal, and that Victoria was simply protective of her territory. What he failed to see, or chose to ignore, was that Victoria's behavior went far beyond normal adjustment issues. The real dynamic became clear during Sofia's first semester at Westfield Academy, the exclusive private school where Victoria had reigned a social royalty since kindergarten. On Sofia's first day, Victoria had smiled sweetly and offered to show her around, then promptly introduced her to everyone as the scholarship kid whose mom married my dad for money. The lie spread through the school like wildfire, and no amount of correction could undo the damage. Sofia found herself socially isolated, marked as an outsider despite her family's actual wealth. Elena, busy managing her rapidly expanding business and adjusting to her new role as Richard's wife, didn't immediately grasp the extent of Victoria's campaign against her daughter. Sofia, not wanting to cause problems in her mother's new marriage, learned to handle the situation alone. She threw herself into her studies, excelling in mathematics and computer science, following in her mother's footsteps with a natural aptitude for logical problem-solving. High school brought new challenges as Victoria's social influence grew stronger. She was captain of the tennis team, student body treasurer, and the unofficial queen of their social circle. Sofia, meanwhile, found her tribe among the academic achievers and technology enthusiasts. She founded the school's first cybersecurity club, won multiple state-level programming competitions, and graduated as valedictorian despite Victoria's constant undermining. The contrast between the sisters became even starker during college selection. Victoria chose Fashion Institute of Technology, more interested in the social aspects of college life than academic rigor. Sofia earned a full scholarship to MIT, something Victoria dismissed as typical nerd school for people who can't handle real social situations. Richard's pride in Sofia's achievement was genuine, but tempered by his need to support Victoria's feelings, leading to a graduation dinner where Sofia's MIT acceptance was mentioned briefly, while Victoria's acceptance to FIT was celebrated extensively. At MIT, Sofia flourished in ways she'd never experienced at home. Surrounded by brilliant minds who valued intelligence over social pedigree, she discovered her true potential. She double-majored in computer science and business, maintained a perfect GPA, and spent her summers interning at top tech companies. More importantly, she learned to value herself based on her own achievements rather than her stepfamily's approval. During her senior year, Sofia developed a revolutionary algorithm for detecting sophisticated financial fraud, something that could save banks millions of dollars annually. Her thesis advisor, Dr. Sarah Williams, encouraged her to patent the technology and consider starting her own company. The idea terrified and exhilarated Sofia in equal measure. She'd grown up watching her mother build something from nothing, but the thought of striking out on her own felt overwhelming. The decision became easier when she returned home for spring break and overheard a conversation between Richard and Victoria that changed everything. Victoria was complaining about her struggles in her fashion program, hinting that she wanted Richard to use his connections to secure her an internship at a prestigious design house. Richard was sympathetic, promising to make some calls, when Victoria casually mentioned Sofia's upcoming graduation. "At least when Sofia's done with her little computer phase, she can come work for Wong's company," Victoria said dismissively. "I mean, it's not like she'll ever be able to build anything herself. She's always been better at following other people's instructions." Richard's response cut deeper than Victoria's insult. "Sofia's certainly capable, but you're right that she works better with structure. Elena's been talking about bringing her into Phoenix as a junior developer after graduation. It would be good for her to have that stability." Sofia stood frozen in the hallway, realizing that her family saw her future as a predetermined path rather than an open horizon. They'd never considered that she might want to forge her own way, that her MIT education had given her tools to build something entirely new. That night, she called Dr. Williams and told her she was ready to take the leap into entrepreneurship. The summer after graduation, while Victoria spent her days shopping and attending charity brunches funded by Richard's generosity, Sofia locked herself in a small office space in Cambridge and began building her company. She called it Guardian Analytics, focusing on the financial fraud detection system she'd developed in school.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The technology was sophisticated enough to identify patterns that traditional systems missed, potentially saving financial institutions millions in prevented losses. Finding initial funding proved challenging for a 22-year-old with no business experience, but Sofia's technical brilliance and her mother's reputation in the cybersecurity world opened doors. Elena, proud of her daughter's ambition, provided seed funding and valuable industry connections. Within 6 months, Guardian Analytics had its first major client, a mid-sized regional bank that had been struggling with fraudulent transactions. The success was immediate and dramatic. Sofia's system caught several sophisticated fraud attempts that the bank's existing security had missed, saving them over $2 million in the first quarter alone. Word spread quickly through the financial community, and soon Sofia found herself fielding calls from much larger institutions interested in her technology. By her 24th birthday, Guardian Analytics had grown to 15 employees and was protecting over 30 financial institutions across the East Coast. Sofia had moved the company to a sleek office in Boston's financial district and was regularly featured in technology magazines as one of the industry's rising stars. The awkward, socially isolated teenager had transformed into a confident businesswoman who commanded respect in boardrooms filled with executives twice her age. Despite her professional success, Sofia's personal life remained complicated by family dynamics that hadn't improved with time or distance. Victoria had struggled to find her footing after college, cycling through various jobs in fashion and marketing that never seemed to stick. Richard continued to support her financially while she found her passion, a luxury that had never been extended to Sofia even when she was building her company from scratch. Family gatherings became exercises in careful navigation, with Sofia downplaying her achievements to avoid triggering Victoria's jealousy, while Elena and Richard tried to maintain peace between their daughters. Sofia often found herself wondering if the family harmony was worth the constant need to diminish herself, but her love for her mother kept her coming to dinners and holiday celebrations. The dynamic shifted dramatically when Sofia met Marcus Rothschild at a financial technology conference in New York. Marcus was 26, devastatingly handsome, and the heir to one of the oldest investment banking dynasties in the country. He was also charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely impressed by Sofia's work rather than intimidated by her success. Their connection was immediate and intense, built on shared interests in technology and finance, as well as an undeniable physical attraction. Marcus pursued Sofia with the confidence of someone who'd never been rejected, flying her to Paris for their third date and introducing her to his circle of influential friends and colleagues. For the first time in her life, Sofia felt like she was with someone who saw her as an equal partner rather than a problem to be managed or a threat to be contained. Marcus celebrated her achievements, bragged about her brilliance to anyone who would listen, and made her feel beautiful in a way that went beyond physical appearance. Their relationship progressed quickly, with Marcus practically moving into Sofia's Boston penthouse within 3 months of dating. He fit seamlessly into her life, understanding the demands of running a growing company and supporting her ambitions without trying to redirect them. When he suggested she meet his family during a weekend trip to their estate in the Hamptons, Sofia felt ready to take that step toward a more serious commitment. The Rothschild estate was everything Sofia expected from old money aristocracy: sprawling grounds, impeccable gardens, and a house that had been in the family for 4 generations. Marcus's parents, Jonathan and Catherine Rothschild, were polite but reserved, clearly assessing whether Sofia met their standards for their son's partner. The weekend went well enough, with Sofia holding her own in conversations about art, politics, and philanthropy, while demonstrating the kind of intellectual sophistication they valued. It was during the drive back to the city that Marcus first mentioned his older brother, Alexander. "You'd love Alex," he said casually. "He's even more of a tech geek than you are, if that's possible. Runs the family's venture capital arm and has this uncanny ability to spot the next big thing before anyone else sees it coming." Sofia filed away the information, curious about the family member she hadn't met, but not particularly focused on anyone other than Marcus. She was too busy enjoying the first healthy romantic relationship of her life and building a company that was exceeding every projection she'd made. Guardian Analytics was on track to double its revenue for the 2nd consecutive year, and Sofia was fielding acquisition offers from major corporations eager to integrate her technology into their existing security systems. The success brought new challenges, including the need to decide whether to sell the company for a substantial profit or continue growing it independently. Marcus encouraged her to consider the acquisition offers, pointing out that the financial security would allow her to pursue other interests or start new ventures without the pressure of keeping Guardian Analytics profitable. His advice was logical and well-intentioned, but Sofia found herself hesitating to give up the company she'd built from nothing. That hesitation created their first real conflict. Marcus couldn't understand why Sofia would choose the stress and uncertainty of continued entrepreneurship over the guaranteed success of a lucrative exit. He'd grown up in a world where wealth was inherited rather than created, and the idea of turning down millions of dollars to keep working 18-hour days seemed illogical to him. Their arguments about the company's future became more frequent and more heated, with Marcus suggesting that Sofia was being stubborn and risk-averse, while Sofia felt like he didn't understand the deeper meaning of her work. Guardian Analytics wasn't just a business to her, it was proof that she could build something significant on her own terms, something that belonged to her in a way that family wealth or marriage never could. The tension came to a head during Sofia's 26th birthday party, an elegant affair that Marcus had organized at an exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. He'd invited both their families, something Sofia had been dreading given the complicated dynamics between her success and Victoria's ongoing struggles. Elena and Richard arrived with Victoria in tow, who had recently been let go from her latest marketing job and was in one of her particularly bitter moods. The evening started well enough, with polite conversation and genuine celebration of Sofia's achievements. Marcus had arranged for a special presentation highlighting Guardian Analytics' growth and impact, something that made Sofia feel truly seen and appreciated. The trouble began when Victoria, several glasses of wine into the evening, decided to share her thoughts on Sofia's relationship. "It's so nice that Sofia finally found someone," Victoria announced to the table, her voice carrying the dangerous sweetness that always preceded her worst moments. "I was starting to worry she'd end up alone with her computers forever. Of course, it doesn't hurt that Marcus comes from the kind of family that can afford to support her little hobby business." The comment was carefully crafted to be insulting on multiple levels, dismissing her company as a hobby, implying that Marcus was financially supporting her, and suggesting that she was lucky to have found anyone willing to date her. Sofia felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising in her chest, but before she could respond, Marcus spoke up. "Actually, Victoria, Sofia's company is quite successful on its own. She doesn't need financial support from anyone," he said firmly, his voice carrying an edge that Sofia had never heard before. Victoria's smile widened, sensing blood in the water. "Oh, I'm sure it's adorable how proud she is of her little startup, but let's be realistic about what happens when she wants to have a real family life. You can't build something lasting when you're working all the time, can you, Marcus? Surely you'd want a wife who could prioritize your relationship properly." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sofia watched Marcus's face carefully for his response. This was the moment that would define their relationship. Would he stand up for her ambitions, or would he validate Victoria's implications that her career was incompatible with being a good partner? Marcus hesitated just enough for Sofia to see the truth in his expression. While he never said it directly, he did expect that marriage would mean Sofia stepping back from her company, focusing more on their relationship, and eventually their family. The pause before his response told Sofia everything she needed to know about how he really viewed her work. "Sofia's certainly accomplished," Marcus said finally, "but I think we can find a balance that works for both our careers and our relationship." It wasn't the worst thing he could have said, but it wasn't the defense Sofia needed either. The phrase "find a balance" was code for compromise, and in Sofia's experience, women were always the ones expected to do the compromising. Victoria's triumphant smile confirmed that she'd successfully planted seeds of doubt about Sofia's priorities, and the rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable tension. The fight that followed when they returned to Sofia's apartment was inevitable. Marcus couldn't understand why Sofia was upset about his response, arguing that he'd defended her company and their relationship. Sofia tried to explain that his hesitation had revealed his true feelings about her career, that he saw it as something that would eventually need to be scaled back, rather than something integral to who she was. "You're being oversensitive," Marcus said, using the phrase that had ended many relationships before theirs. "I support your work, but I also think it's reasonable to expect that marriage changes priorities for both partners. I'm not asking you to give up your company, just to consider how we can build a life together that doesn't revolve entirely around your work schedule." Sofia realized in that moment that Marcus loved the idea of her more than he loved the reality of who she was. He was attracted to her intelligence and success, but only to the extent that they didn't interfere with his vision of their future together. The successful entrepreneur was appealing as long as she was also willing to be the supportive wife when circumstances required it. Their relationship limped along for several more months, but the birthday party had revealed fundamental incompatibilities that couldn't be negotiated away. Marcus wanted a partner who would complement his life without overshadowing it, while Sofia needed someone who understood that her work wasn't just what she did, but who she was. The final break came when Marcus suggested that Sofia consider the acquisition offers more seriously, framing it as a way to free up time for their relationship. "Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to cash out and focus on other things," he said, during what would turn out to be their last dinner together. "You've proven you can build something successful. Now you could focus on building something lasting with me." Sofia looked across the table at this man she'd thought she might marry and realized that he fundamentally didn't understand her. To Marcus, Guardian Analytics was a phase to be completed rather than a calling to be pursued. He saw her success as a stepping stone to something else rather than a destination worth reaching on its own terms. "I don't think this is going to work," Sofia said quietly, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. "We want different things, and neither of us should have to change who we are to make this relationship work." Marcus was shocked by her directness, having expected that his suggestion would be received as romantic rather than reductive. "You're really going to choose your company over our relationship?" he asked, genuinely confused by her priorities. "I'm choosing myself," Sofia corrected, "and if that's incompatible with being with you, then we shouldn't be together." The breakup was surprisingly amicable, with Marcus eventually admitting that he'd hoped Sofia would want to step back from her career once they got serious. They agreed to remain friends, and Marcus even offered to help her make connections in the venture capital world that might be useful for Guardian Analytics' future growth. Sofia appreciated the gesture, while recognizing it as confirmation that she'd made the right decision. What Sofia didn't anticipate was how quickly news of their breakup would reach her family, or how differently it would be received by different people. Elena was supportive, having suspected that Marcus wasn't the right fit for her driven daughter. Richard was disappointed, having enjoyed the social connection to the Rothschild family. But Victoria's reaction was the most revealing and the most damaging. 2 weeks after the breakup, Sofia received a call from her mother with disturbing news. Victoria had somehow gotten Marcus's phone number and had been calling him, ostensibly to offer comfort during his difficult time, but actually to plant seeds of doubt about Sofia's character and priorities. Elena had learned about the calls from Richard, who had overheard Victoria describing Sofia as career-obsessed and incapable of putting relationship first during one of her conversations with Marcus. "She's trying to position herself as the sympathetic sister who understands what you put him through," Elena explained, her voice tight with anger. "Richard finally told her to stop, but I don't know how long she's been doing this or what exactly she's been saying." Sofia felt sick at the thought of Victoria using her breakup as an opportunity to undermine her further, but she tried to dismiss it as typical attention-seeking behavior. Marcus was too smart to be manipulated by Victoria's obvious attempts at interference, and their relationship was over anyway. What harm could Victoria's meddling really do? She got her answer 3 months later when Marcus called her unexpectedly, his voice carrying an excitement she hadn't heard since their early dating days. "I have something I need to tell you," he said, and Sofia could hear the smile in his voice. "Victoria and I have been spending some time together, and it's turned into something special. I wanted you to hear it from me before anyone else." The words hit Sofia like a physical blow, not because she wanted Marcus back, but because the betrayal was so complete and so calculated. Victoria had used Sofia's breakup as an opportunity to insert herself into Marcus's life, positioning herself as the understanding sister who could offer him everything Sofia had withheld. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity and devastating in its effectiveness. "I hope you can be happy for us," Marcus continued, apparently misinterpreting Sofia's silence as surprise rather than disgust. "Victoria really understands what I need in a partner, and she's helped me realize that maybe the breakup was for the best. We all got what we needed in the end." Sofia managed to murmur appropriate congratulations, but inside, she was reeling from the magnitude of Victoria's betrayal. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or social competition, it was a deliberate campaign to take something Sofia had valued and claim it as her own prize.
The fact that Marcus had been so easily manipulated only confirmed that Sofia had been right to end their relationship. But that didn't lessen the sting of being betrayed by the two people who should have understood her best. The engagement announcement came 6 months later, splashed across the society pages with photos of Victoria wearing a ring that probably cost more than most people's houses. The article described their whirlwind romance and included quotes from both families expressing their delight at the union. Richard was quoted as saying he was thrilled to welcome Marcus into the family officially, while Catherine Rothschild praised Victoria's grace and social connections. Sofia wasn't mentioned in the article, but she didn't need to be. Everyone in their social circle knew the history, and Victoria's triumph was complete. She'd taken Marcus's boyfriend, convinced him that she was the better choice, and was now about to marry into one of the wealthiest families in the country. The girl who had always resented Sofia's achievements had finally found a way to surpass them in the one area that mattered most to their family's values: social status. The wedding planning became a months-long celebration of Victoria's victory, with constant updates about designer dress fittings, exclusive venue selections, and celebrity guest lists. Elena tried to shield Sofia from the worst of it, but the engagement was impossible to ignore when it dominated every family conversation and social gathering. Victoria's transformation from struggling fashion school graduate to socialite bride was complete, and she made sure everyone knew that she'd succeeded where Sofia had failed. The cruelest moment came during a family dinner 3 months before the wedding, when Victoria made a point of asking Sofia about her dating life. "I hope you're putting yourself out there," she said with fake concern. "I know it must be hard to meet people when you work so much, but you can't give up on finding love. Maybe you could try one of those apps for busy professionals?" The suggestion was designed to emphasize that Sofia was alone while Victoria was planning her dream wedding, and it worked perfectly. Sofia felt the familiar humiliation of being pitied by someone who had engineered her own misfortune, but she managed to respond graciously while internally vowing that this would be the last family dinner she attended for a while. What Victoria didn't know, and what Sofia was about to discover, was that her cruelest triumph would become the foundation for Sofia's greatest success. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best opportunities, and sometimes losing something you thought you wanted creates space for something infinitely better. Sofia's real story was just beginning, and Victoria's victory celebration was about to become very short-lived. Marcus couldn't understand why Sofia was upset about his response, arguing that he'd defended her company and their relationship. Sofia tried to explain that his hesitation had revealed his true feelings about her career, that he saw it as something that would eventually need to be scaled back, rather than something integral to who she was. "You're being oversensitive," Marcus said, using the phrase that had ended many relationships before theirs. "I support your work, but I also think it's reasonable to expect that marriage changes priorities for both partners. I'm not asking you to give up your company, just to consider how we can build a life together that doesn't revolve entirely around your work schedule." Sofia realized in that moment that Marcus loved the idea of her more than he loved the reality of who she was. He was attracted to her intelligence and success, but only to the extent that they didn't interfere with his vision of their future together. The successful entrepreneur was appealing as long as she was also willing to be the supportive wife when circumstances required it. Their relationship limped along for several more months, but the birthday party had revealed fundamental incompatibilities that couldn't be negotiated away. Marcus wanted a partner who would complement his life without overshadowing it, while Sofia needed someone who understood that her work wasn't just what she did, but who she was. The final break came when Marcus suggested that Sofia consider the acquisition offers more seriously, framing it as a way to free up time for their relationship. "Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to cash out and focus on other things," he said, during what would turn out to be their last dinner together. "You've proven you can build something successful. Now you could focus on building something lasting with me." Sofia looked across the table at this man she'd thought she might marry and realized that he fundamentally didn't understand her. To Marcus, Guardian Analytics was a phase to be completed rather than a calling to be pursued. He saw her success as a stepping stone to something else, rather than a destination worth reaching on its own terms. "I don't think this is going to work," Sofia said quietly, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. "We want different things, and neither of us should have to change who we are to make this relationship work." Marcus was shocked by her directness.
The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor about these things, and Alexander Rothschild was about to become living proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well enough to make your enemy's victories look like consolation prizes. Sophia threw herself into work with the intensity of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. Guardian Analytics was experiencing its most successful quarter yet, with 3 major banks signing million-dollar contracts in the span of 6 weeks. The irony wasn't lost on her that her professional life was thriving just as her personal life had imploded, but she found solace in the predictable logic of code and algorithms where betrayal was impossible and loyalty was measured in ones and zeros. The Manhattan office she'd opened 6 months earlier was buzzing with activity. 23 employees now worked across 2 floors of a gleaming tower in the financial district, and Sophia had finally hired a chief operating officer to handle the day-to-day management while she focused on product development and strategic partnerships. Dr. Jennifer Kim, a former Goldman Sachs executive with an MBA from Wharton, had joined the team with the specific mandate to scale Guardian Analytics for international expansion. Sophia was reviewing proposals for their London office launch when her assistant, David Martinez, knocked on her glass-walled corner office. "You have a visitor," he said, his expression curious. "Alexander Rothschild from Pinnacle Ventures. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's about a potential partnership opportunity." The name hit Sophia like a cold shock. Alexander Rothschild, Marcus's older brother, the one she'd never met but heard described as a brilliant venture capitalist with an almost supernatural ability to identify breakthrough technologies. She'd wondered occasionally what he was like, especially given how different he seemed from Marcus based on their brief descriptions, but she'd never expected to meet him, particularly not now. "Did he say what kind of partnership?" Sophia asked, buying time while she decided how to handle this unexpected development. "Something about emerging technologies in financial security," David replied. "He seemed very knowledgeable about our recent contracts with Deutsche Bank and Credit Suisse. Should I tell him you're unavailable?" Sophia's business instincts warred with her personal complications. Pinnacle Ventures was one of the most respected venture capital firms in the country, with a portfolio that included some of the most successful tech companies of the past decade. A partnership with them could accelerate Guardian Analytics' growth by years, providing not just funding, but access to networks and expertise that money couldn't buy. But accepting a meeting with Marcus's brother felt like walking into a minefield blindfolded. "Give me 5 minutes, then send him in," Sophia decided. Whatever personal awkwardness might ensue, she couldn't let it interfere with a potentially transformative business opportunity. She used the time to review what she knew about Alexander Rothschild, which wasn't much beyond his reputation for identifying technology companies before they became household names. He'd been the first major investor in 3 companies that had gone on to achieve billion-dollar valuations, and his fund's track record was so impressive that entrepreneurs competed fiercely just to get meetings with him. If he was interested in Guardian Analytics, it meant they'd crossed some invisible threshold of success that she hadn't even known existed. When David opened her office door to admit Alexander, Sophia's first thought was that the Rothschild family had gotten all their genetic gifts from the same extraordinary source. Alexander was tall like Marcus, but broader through the shoulders, with dark hair that was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it while thinking through complex problems. His suit was perfectly tailored, but worn with the casual confidence of someone who didn't need to think about what impression his clothes made. But it was his eyes that caught Sophia's attention, dark blue and intensely intelligent, with the kind of focus that made her feel like he was seeing something in her that most people missed. "Miss Chen," he said, extending his hand with a smile that was warmer than she'd expected, "thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I know how valuable your time is." His handshake was firm and brief, professional in every way, but Sophia felt an unexpected jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was the most interesting person he'd encountered all day. "Please, call me Sophia," she said, gesturing toward the seating area by the windows. "I have to admit, I'm curious about what brings Pinnacle Ventures to Guardian Analytics. We're still relatively small compared to your usual portfolio companies." Alexander settled into the chair across from her, pulling out a tablet and a leather portfolio with the unconscious efficiency of someone who spent most of his life in meetings. Size isn't always the most important factor, he said, his voice carrying a slight hint of an accent that Sofia couldn't place. Revolutionary technology has a way of creating its own scale, and what you've built here is genuinely revolutionary. He opened his tablet and showed her a detailed analysis of Guardian Analytics performance, including some data that Sofia was surprised he'd been able to access. The report was more thorough than anything her own board had compiled, with projections and market analysis that demonstrated a deep understanding of both her technology and the broader financial security landscape. Your fraud detection algorithm is identifying patterns that established systems miss by a factor of 12 to 1, Alexander continued, but more importantly, it's learning and adapting faster than anything else in the market. The machine learning architecture you've developed is at least 3 years ahead of your closest competitors. Sofia found herself leaning forward, drawn into the conversation by his obvious expertise and genuine appreciation for her work. It had been months since anyone had discussed Guardian Analytics with this level of technical sophistication, and she had forgotten how energizing it was to talk with someone who understood the nuances of what she'd built. The question, Alexander said, setting down his tablet and looking directly at her, is what you want to do with that advantage. You could continue growing organically and probably build a very successful company over the next decade, or you could accept a strategic partnership that would let you dominate the global market within 3 years. And Pinnacle Ventures would be that strategic partner? Sofia asked, though she already knew the answer. We'd be one component of it, Alexander replied. I'm thinking about something more comprehensive than traditional venture capital. A partnership that would give you access to Pinnacle's portfolio companies, our international networks, and our regulatory expertise while preserving your company's independence and your control over the technology. The offer was more generous than anything Sofia had imagined, especially coming from a firm with Pinnacle's reputation for driving hard bargains. Most venture capital partnerships came with significant strings attached, including board control and operational oversight that could fundamentally change how a company operated. Alexander seemed to be suggesting something much more collaborative. That sounds almost too good to true, Sofia said carefully. What would Pinnacle get in return? Alexander smiled, and Sofia noticed that his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, giving his otherwise serious face an unexpectedly playful quality. 20% equity in exchange for $50 million in expansion capital, plus access to our network and expertise. You'd retain majority control and complete operational independence. The numbers made Sofia's heart race. $50 million would fund their international expansion, allow them to hire the best talent in the industry, and accelerate their research and development by years. But more than the money, the partnership with Pinnacle would give Guardian Analytics credibility and connections that were impossible to buy. But accepting a meeting with Marcus's brother felt like walking into a minefield blindfolded. Give me 5 minutes, then send him in, Sofia decided. Whatever personal awkwardness might ensue, she couldn't let it interfere with a potentially transformative business opportunity. She used the time to review what she knew about Alexander Rothschild, which wasn't much beyond his reputation for identifying technology companies before they became household names. He'd been the first major investor in 3 companies that had gone on to achieve billion-dollar valuations, and his fund's track record was so impressive that entrepreneurs competed fiercely just to get meetings with him. If he was interested in Guardian Analytics, it meant they'd crossed some invisible threshold of success that she hadn't even known existed. When David opened her office door to admit Alexander, Sofia's first thought was that the Rothschild family had gotten all their genetic gifts from the same extraordinary source. Alexander was tall like Marcus, but broader through the shoulders, with dark hair that was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it while thinking through complex problems. His suit was perfectly tailored, but worn with the casual confidence of someone who didn't need to think about what impression his clothes made. But it was his eyes that caught Sofia's attention, dark blue and intensely intelligent, with the kind of focus that made her feel like he was seeing something in her that most people missed. Miss Chen, he said, extending his hand with a smile that was warmer than she'd expected, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I know how valuable your time is.
His handshake was firm and brief, professional in every way, but Sofia felt an unexpected jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was the most interesting person he'd encountered all day. "Please, call me Sofia," she said, gesturing toward the seating area by the windows. "I have to admit, I'm curious about what brings Pinnacle Ventures to Guardian Analytics. We're still relatively small compared to your usual portfolio companies." Alexander settled into the chair across from her, pulling out a tablet and a leather portfolio, with the unconscious efficiency of someone who spent most of his life in meetings. "Size isn't always the most important factor," he said. "Revolutionary technology has a way of creating its own scale, and what you've built here is genuinely revolutionary." He opened his tablet and showed her a detailed analysis of Guardian Analytics performance metrics, including some data that Sofia was surprised he'd been able to access. The report was more thorough than anything her own board had compiled, with projections and market analysis that demonstrated a deep understanding of both her technology and the broader financial security landscape. "Your fraud—"
"I'd need to see the full terms, of course," Sofia said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her excitement, "and discuss it with my board and advisors." "Of course," Alexander agreed. "I've brought a preliminary proposal with me, but I'd prefer to discuss the details over dinner if you're available. These kinds of partnerships work best when both parties understand each other's motivations and goals beyond just the financial arrangements." The invitation caught Sofia off guard, partly because it blurred the line between business and personal in a way that made her suddenly aware of Alexander as a man rather than just a potential business partner, but mostly because she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her, some additional layer to his interest that went beyond Guardian Analytics' impressive metrics. "I should probably mention," Sofia said, deciding that honesty was the best approach, "that your brother Marcus and I used to date. I want to make sure that doesn't create any conflicts or complications for a potential business relationship." Alexander's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that Sofia couldn't quite interpret. "I'm aware of your history with Marcus," he said simply. "It doesn't create any conflicts for me professionally. Should it create any for you?" The question was fair, but the way he asked it suggested that he knew more about her breakup with Marcus than she would have expected. Sofia found herself wondering what version of events he'd heard, and from whom, but she decided that speculation wasn't productive. "Not professionally," Sofia answered, "but I wanted to be transparent about the situation." "I appreciate that," Alexander said, standing up with the fluid grace of someone who was comfortable in his own body. "The dinner invitation stands if you're interested. There's a new restaurant in Tribeca that I think you'd enjoy, and we could discuss the partnership in a more relaxed setting." Sofia hesitated for just a moment, weighing the potential complications against the opportunity to learn more about a partnership that could transform her company's future. The business case for accepting was overwhelming, and she'd navigated more challenging professional situations than dinner with her ex-boyfriend's brother. "That sounds perfect," she said, accepting the card he offered with the restaurant's address. 7 o'clock? "Perfect," Alexander confirmed, and his smile transformed his entire face from serious venture capitalist to someone Sofia found herself genuinely looking forward to getting to know better. After he left, Sofia sat in her office staring at the preliminary proposal he'd left behind, trying to process what had just happened. The business terms were extraordinary, almost too generous for a company Guardian Analytics size. But beyond the financials, there was something about Alexander himself that intrigued her. He'd approached the conversation with a combination of professional expertise and personal warmth that was rare in her experience with investors and partners. She called Dr. Kim into her office to review the proposal, needing a second opinion from someone with extensive experience in venture capital negotiations. Jennifer's reaction was immediate and unambiguous. "This is the most favorable term sheet I've ever seen for a company our size," she said after reviewing the documents. "Either Alexander Rothschild has lost his mind, or he sees something in Guardian Analytics that makes him willing to accept terms that strongly favor us. Or there's something we're not understanding about what he really wants," Sofia added, voicing the concern that had been nagging at her since Alexander left. "Maybe," Jennifer agreed, "but sometimes good opportunities are just good opportunities.
Pinnacle Ventures has a reputation for being tough but fair, and their portfolio companies consistently outperform market expectations. If they're offering this kind of partnership, it's because they believe Guardian Analytics can deliver returns that justify the investment. Sophia spent the rest of the afternoon researching Alexander's background more thoroughly, discovering details that Marcus had never mentioned during their relationship. Alexander had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School after completing undergraduate degrees in both computer science and economics at Stanford. He'd spent 2 years working for McKinsey & Company before joining a small venture capital firm where he'd identified and invested in several companies that became major successes. But what impressed Sophia most was reading interviews where Alexander discussed his investment philosophy. Unlike many venture capitalists who focused primarily on financial returns, he seemed genuinely interested in supporting technologies that could solve meaningful problems. Several articles mentioned his particular interest in companies founded by women and minorities, citing his belief that diverse perspectives led to more innovative solutions. By 6 o'clock, Sophia had convinced herself that the dinner was purely a business meeting, and that any personal awareness she felt toward Alexander was simply a natural response to someone who appreciated her work. She changed into a black dress that was professional but flattering, telling herself that looking polished was important for any business negotiation. The restaurant Alexander had chosen was intimate without being romantic, with an innovative menu that focused on locally sourced ingredients prepared with molecular gastronomy techniques. Sophia arrived 5 minutes early, a habit from years of business dinners, and was surprised to find Alexander already seated at a corner table, reviewing something on his phone. He stood when he saw her approaching, and Sophia noticed that he'd changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a navy blazer that made him look younger and more approachable. The transformation reminded her uncomfortably of Marcus, who had also known how to dress for different occasions, but Alexander's casual elegance seemed more natural, less calculated. "I hope you don't mind that I ordered wine," Alexander said, as the sommelier appeared with a bottle of Burgundy. "I thought we could start with something to celebrate Guardian Analytics' success before we dive into business discussions." The wine was exceptional, and Sophia found herself relaxing as they talked through the details of Guardian Analytics' growth trajectory and expansion plans. Alexander asked intelligent questions about her technology and business model, but he also seemed genuinely interested in her personal story and what had motivated her to start the company. "Most people assume I founded Guardian Analytics because I saw a market opportunity," Sophia said, as they shared an appetizer of deconstructed Caesar salad. "But the truth is, I started it because I wanted to prove something to myself. I wanted to build something that belonged to me completely, something that no one could take away or diminish." "And have you?" Alexander asked, his attention focused entirely on her answer. "Mostly," Sophia replied, surprised by her own honesty. "The company's success has given me confidence and independence that I never had before, but I'm still learning how to separate my self-worth from other people's approval or disapproval." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "That's one of the hardest things about building something from nothing. You invest so much of yourself in the work that it becomes impossible to separate criticism of the business from criticism of you personally." "Exactly," Sophia said, feeling understood in a way that was comforting and slightly unsettling. "Have you experienced that?" "Not as a founder, but as an investor who's worked with dozens of entrepreneurs," Alexander replied. "I've seen brilliant people sabotage their own success because they couldn't handle the vulnerability that comes with putting your vision out into the world." The conversation continued through the main course, ranging from business strategy to personal philosophy, and Sophia found herself sharing details about her background and motivations that she rarely discussed with anyone. Alexander was an exceptional listener, asking follow-up questions that showed he was not only paying attention, but thinking deeply about what she was telling him.
It wasn't until dessert arrived that Alexander finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I should probably tell you," he said, his tone becoming more serious, "that Marcus mentioned your breakup to me several months ago. He said you chose your career over your relationship with him." Sophia felt her defenses rising, but Alexander's expression was curious rather than judgmental. "That's one way to describe what happened," she said carefully. "What's another way?" Alexander asked. Sophia considered how to answer, weighing her desire to defend herself against her reluctance to criticize Marcus to his brother. "I think Marcus wanted a partner who would complement his life without competing with it," she said finally. "And what's another way?" Alexander asked. Sophia considered how to answer,
weighing her desire to defend herself against her reluctance to criticize Marcus to his brother. "I think Marcus wanted a partner who would complement his life without competing with it," she said finally. "And I needed someone who understands that my work isn't just what I do, it's who I am." Alexander was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine in his glass. "Marcus has always been attracted to successful women," he said thoughtfully, "but I think he struggles with the reality of what that success requires. He wants the prestige of dating an accomplished woman without having to deal with the demands and complications that come with real ambition." The observation was so perceptive and so accurate that Sofia felt a jolt of recognition. "That's exactly what I could never quite articulate," she said. "He loved the idea of me more than the reality of me." "His loss," Alexander said simply, and something in his tone made Sofia look at him more carefully. The moment stretched between them, loaded with implications that neither of them seemed ready to address directly. Sofia found herself wondering if Alexander's interest in Guardian Analytics was purely professional, or if there were personal motivations she hadn't considered. "I should probably also mention," Alexander continued, "that Marcus is engaged to someone named Victoria. I believe she's your stepsister." Sofia's stomach dropped, not because she still had feelings for Marcus, but because the reminder of Victoria's triumph brought back all the humiliation and anger she'd been trying to process. "Yes, she is," Sofia said, working to keep her voice neutral. "They seem very happy together." Alexander studied her face carefully. "Are you okay with that situation?" The question was direct enough that Sofia couldn't deflect it with polite platitudes. "Honestly, it's complicated," she admitted. "I'm not heartbroken about Marcus, but the way it happened felt like a betrayal. Victoria has always been competitive with me, and taking my ex-boyfriend felt like her way of proving she could have anything I had. That must have been difficult," Alexander said, and his sympathy seemed genuine rather than perfunctory. "It was," Sofia agreed, "but it also clarified some things for me about what I really want in my life and my relationships." "Such as?" Sofia considered the question, realizing that she'd never fully articulated her thoughts about what she'd learned from the Marcus situation. "I want to be with someone who sees my success as something to celebrate rather than something to manage," she said. "Someone who understands that supporting my dreams means supporting all of them, not just the ones that fit conveniently into their vision of our future together." Alexander nodded slowly. "That seems like a reasonable standard." "You'd be surprised how challenging it is to find," Sofia replied with a rueful smile. "Maybe you've been looking in the wrong places," Alexander suggested, and again, Sofia felt that undercurrent of meaning that went beyond casual conversation. They talked for another hour, covering everything from Guardian Analytics' international expansion plans to their shared love of travel and classical music. Alexander had studied piano for 12 years and still played when he needed to think through complex problems, while Sofia had learned violin as a child but had given it up when her schedule became too demanding. "You should start playing again," Alexander said when she mentioned missing the creative outlet that music had provided. "There's something about engaging a different part of your brain that can actually enhance analytical thinking." "I might," Sofia said, surprised to find herself considering the suggestion seriously. "I'd have to find time in my schedule." "You'd have to make time," Alexander corrected gently. "There's a difference." The observation was another small insight into how Alexander approached life, and Sofia found herself increasingly impressed by his thoughtfulness and depth. He wasn't just intelligent in the way that many successful business people were. He seemed to think carefully about how different aspects of life connected and influenced each other. When the evening finally ended, Alexander walked Sofia to her car, a courtesy that felt natural rather than obligatory. "I hope you'll consider the partnership proposal seriously," he said as they reached her Tesla. "I think Guardian Analytics and Pinnacle Ventures could accomplish something extraordinary together." "I will," Sofia promised, and she meant it. The business case for the partnership was compelling enough on its own, but the evening had also given her confidence that Alexander would be someone she could work with productively and enjoyably. "And I hope we can continue getting to know each other," Alexander added, "regardless of what you decide about the business partnership." The statement was direct enough that Sofia couldn't misinterpret it as purely professional interest, and she felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension.
Dating her ex-boyfriend's brother would be complicated under any circumstances, but doing it while considering a major business partnership added layers of potential complications that made her cautious. That sounds nice, Sofia said carefully, but it might be better to sort out the business relationship first. Alexander smiled, apparently not surprised by her response. Fair enough, but I want you to know that my interest in Guardian Analytics is completely separate from my interest in getting to know you better. Whatever you decide about the partnership won't affect my opinion of you personally. The clarification was reassuring, and Sofia found herself returning his smile. Good to know. I'll have our lawyers prepare the full partnership documents and send them to your team by Friday. Take whatever time you need to review them. Sofia drove home through the quiet Manhattan streets, her mind racing with thoughts about the evening and what it might mean for her future. The partnership offer was genuinely exciting, potentially transformative for Guardian Analytics in ways that went far beyond just financial investment.
But her growing attraction to Alexander was equally significant, representing the first time since Marcus that she'd met someone who seemed to understand and appreciate her ambitions rather than seeing them as obstacles to overcome. The next morning brought a reality check in the form of a text message from her mother. Saw in the society pages that Victoria and Marcus set a wedding date for next spring. The Rothschild family is hosting an engagement party at their estate next month. I assume we'll be invited as family. Sofia stared at the message, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety that formed whenever Victoria's triumph was thrust back into her consciousness. The thought of attending an engagement party celebrating Victoria's victory over her was nauseating, but refusing to go would create family drama that would ultimately hurt her mother more than anyone else. She was still processing the implications when David knocked on her office door with a concerned expression. Sofia, there's a reporter from TechCrunch online too. She says she's working on a story about Guardian Analytics and wants to ask you some questions about your personal life. Sofia's stomach sank. Technology reporters didn't usually care about entrepreneurs' personal lives unless there was some kind of scandal or controversy brewing. Did she say what specifically she wanted to discuss? Something about your relationship with Marcus Rothschild and how it might affect your business dealings with his family's venture capital firm, David replied. Apparently, someone tipped her off about your dinner with Alexander last night. The implications hit Sofia like a physical blow. Someone had been watching her dinner with Alexander and had connected it to her history with Marcus, creating the foundation for a story that could damage both her professional reputation and any potential relationship with Alexander before it even began. The timing was too coincidental to be accidental, and Sofia had a sinking suspicion about who might have orchestrated the tip. Tell her I'm unavailable for comment, Sofia instructed, and ask Dr. Kim to come to my office immediately. When Jennifer arrived, Sofia explained the situation and asked for her advice on how to handle what was clearly going to become a public relations challenge. The story they're probably developing, Jennifer said after considering the facts, is that you're using your personal connection to the Rothschild family to secure favorable business terms. It's the kind of narrative that's easy to sell and hard to disprove, especially if they frame it as a pattern of behavior. What do you mean, a pattern? Sofia asked, though she suspected she already knew. First you dated Marcus, now you're potentially working with Alexander. From the outside, it could look like you're strategically cultivating relationships with wealthy men to advance your business interests. The unfairness of the implication made Sofia angry, but she recognized the truth in Jennifer's analysis. In a world where women entrepreneurs were already viewed with suspicion, any suggestion that her success was based on personal relationships rather than professional competence could be devastating. So what do we do? Sofia asked. We get ahead of the story, Jennifer replied. We prepare a statement emphasizing that any potential partnership with Pinnacle Ventures would be based solely on Guardian Analytics' performance and growth potential. We highlight your company's achievements and make it clear that your personal life has no bearing on your business decisions. Sofia spent the rest of the morning crafting a statement with Guardian Analytics' communications team, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing defense in a game where someone else was setting the rules. The timing of the reporter's call, coming less than 12 hours after her dinner with Alexander, suggested a level of orchestration that went beyond casual gossip. Her suspicions were confirmed when her assistant forwarded her a link to Victoria's Instagram account.
Her stepsister had posted a series of photos from what appeared to be a charity luncheon, with captions that mentioned family loyalty and staying true to your values. The posts were subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but the timing and tone made Victoria's involvement in the media tip obvious to anyone who knew their history. Sofia realized that Victoria wasn't content to simply have won Marcus. She was actively working to sabotage any potential relationship between Sofia and Alexander. The engagement party would be the perfect venue for Victoria to position herself as the loyal family member while painting Sofia as someone who used personal relationships for professional gain. The situation was becoming more complicated by the hour, and Sofia found herself questioning whether pursuing either the business partnership or the personal relationship with Alexander was worth the potential fallout. She'd built Guardian Analytics by avoiding exactly these kinds of complications, focusing on merit and performance rather than networking and social connections. But as she sat in her office looking out at the Manhattan skyline, Sofia realized that letting Victoria's manipulation dictate her choices would be another form of surrender. She'd spent too many years allowing her stepsister's jealousy and schemes to limit her options and constrain her decisions. Guardian Analytics was strong enough to withstand media scrutiny, and if Alexander was genuinely interested in both her company and her personally, then they could navigate the complications together. The question was whether Alexander would still be interested once the full scope of the family drama became public knowledge. Men in his position had plenty of options for both business partnerships and personal relationships that didn't come with built-in controversy and media attention. Sofia's phone buzzed with a text message from Alexander. Saw the TechCrunch inquiry. Don't let the noise distract you from what matters. Happy to discuss strategy if it would be helpful. The message was brief but supportive, suggesting that Alexander was neither surprised by the media attention nor deterred by it. Sofia found herself smiling for the first time all day, recognizing that she might have found someone who understood that her success would always come with challenges and was willing to face them alongside her rather than asking her to avoid them. She typed back, "Thank you. Dinner tomorrow to discuss strategy? My treat this time." His response came immediately. "Looking forward to it." Sofia leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of determination that she hadn't experienced since the early days of building Guardian Analytics. Victoria's latest scheme had revealed something important. Sofia had something worth fighting for, both professionally and personally. The question now was whether she had the courage to fight for it openly rather than trying to avoid the complications that her stepsister was determined to create. The engagement party was still 3 weeks away, which gave Sofia time to prepare for what was sure to be Victoria's next move in their long-running chess match. But this time, Sofia wasn't going to play defense. This time, she was going to play to win. The partnership documents arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by courier in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Sofia spread the contracts across her conference table, noting that Alexander had been true to his word about the terms being extraordinarily favorable. Pinnacle Ventures was offering $50 million for 20% equity, with protective clauses that preserved her control over Guardian Analytics and limited their ability to influence operational decisions. Dr. Kim reviewed the documents with the thoroughness of someone who had negotiated hundreds of similar deals during her years at Goldman Sachs. "I've never seen terms this generous from a Tier 1 venture capital firm," she said. "Either they're incredibly confident in our growth potential, or Alexander Rothschild is making this decision with motivations beyond pure profit maximization." Sofia had been wondering the same thing, but the business case was compelling regardless of Alexander's personal motivations.
The $50 million would fund their European expansion, allow them to hire top-tier talent, and accelerate their research and development timeline by at least 18 months. Guardian Analytics could become the global leader in financial fraud detection within 3 years, instead of the 7 to 10 years it would take with organic growth. The media attention has actually been helpful, Jennifer continued, referencing the TechCrunch article that had run the previous week. The reporter tried to frame the story around personal relationships, but the business metrics speak for themselves. 3 more major banks called yesterday asking about our services. Sofia smiled at the irony. Victoria's attempt to sabotage her relationship with Alexander had backfired by generating positive publicity for Guardian Analytics.
The article had positioned Sofia as a successful entrepreneur whose technology was attracting interest from major investors, exactly the kind of coverage that established credibility in the venture capital world. The only downside was the increased scrutiny of her personal life, which had intensified as Victoria's engagement party approached. Society reporters were treating the event like a royal wedding, with speculation about guest lists, designer gowns, and family dynamics that would be on display when the ex-girlfriend and the brother-in-law-to-be appeared at the same celebration. Sofia had initially considered declining the invitation, but her mother's quiet plea had changed her mind. Elena had sacrificed too much over the years to maintain family harmony, and Sofia couldn't bring herself to create additional stress by refusing to attend Victoria's moment of triumph. Besides, she was tired of letting Victoria's schemes dictate her choices. Alexander had been remarkably understanding about the situation when she'd explained it during their strategy dinner the previous week. "Family obligations are complicated," he'd said over dessert at a small Italian restaurant in the village, "but you shouldn't have to hide your success or your relationships to make other people comfortable with their choices." The comment had revealed something important about how Alexander viewed both family dynamics and personal integrity. Unlike Marcus, who had always tried to manage competing demands by finding compromises that satisfied no one completely, Alexander seemed to believe in addressing conflicts directly and honestly. Their relationship had developed steadily over the past 3 weeks, built on long conversations about business strategy, technology trends, and personal philosophy. Alexander was intellectually stimulating in ways that Marcus had never been, challenging Sofia's assumptions while supporting her conclusions when they were well-reasoned. More importantly, he seemed genuinely excited about her success rather than threatened by it. The physical attraction had been slower to develop, but was becoming impossible to ignore. Alexander had a way of looking at her during their conversations that made Sofia feel like she was the most fascinating person in the room, and his rare smiles transformed his serious face into something that made her heart race in entirely unprofessional ways. They hadn't discussed the potential complications of dating while negotiating a business partnership, but Sofia suspected that Alexander was waiting for her to make the first move toward acknowledging the personal dimension of their relationship. He was too experienced with professional boundaries to risk jeopardizing a $50 million deal by pursuing a romance prematurely. Sofia was reviewing the final partnership terms when David buzzed her office with an urgent tone. "Sofia, Alexander Rothschild is here to see you. He says it's about the engagement party this weekend." Sofia's heart skipped, though she couldn't tell if it was from anticipation or anxiety. Alexander hadn't mentioned the engagement party since their first dinner, and she'd assumed he would find a polite way to avoid attending an event that celebrated his brother's engagement to her former stepsister. Alexander entered her office with his usual confident stride, but Sofia noticed tension in his shoulders that suggested he was dealing with something more complicated than routine business. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that emphasized his dark hair and blue eyes, and Sofia had to consciously redirect her attention from how attractive he looked to whatever had brought him to her office unannounced. "I have a proposition for you," Alexander said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her desk. "It's personal rather than professional, so feel free to decline if it makes you uncomfortable." Sofia leaned back in her chair, curious about where this conversation was heading. "I'm listening." "Attend the engagement party with me," Alexander said simply, "as my date." The request was direct enough that Sofia couldn't pretend to misunderstand his meaning, but the implications were staggering. Appearing at Victoria's engagement party as Alexander's date would shift the entire narrative from Victoria's triumph over Sofia to Sofia's emergence as someone with even better options than what Victoria had stolen. "That would certainly send a message," Sofia said carefully, "but it might also create complications for your family that you haven't fully considered." Alexander smiled, and Sofia noticed that his eyes had the same crinkled expression she'd observed during their first dinner. "I've been thinking about those complications for weeks," he said. "The conclusion I've reached is that I'm tired of letting other people's drama dictate my personal choices." "Even when those other people include your brother?" "Especially when they include my brother," Alexander replied, his tone becoming more serious. "Marcus made his choice when he decided to date someone who was actively working to undermine you. I don't owe him protection from the consequences of that decision."
Sophia studied Alexander's face, looking for signs of uncertainty or hesitation, but found only calm determination. And what about the business partnership? Mixing personal and professional relationships could complicate things significantly. The partnership offer stands regardless of whether you accept my invitation, Alexander said firmly. I meant what I said about keeping those decisions separate, but I also meant what I said about wanting to get to know you better personally. Sophia felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. Accepting Alexander's invitation would be a public declaration that she wasn't intimidated by Victoria's machinations and that she'd moved beyond the relationship with Marcus to something potentially much more significant. But it would also expose her to scrutiny and criticism from people who would inevitably question her motivations. Victoria will interpret this as a direct challenge, Sophia warned. She'll do everything in her power to make the evening unpleasant for both of us. Let her try, Alexander said with a confidence that was both reassuring and slightly dangerous. Victoria's power comes from other people's willingness to be manipulated by her. If we don't play her games, she can't win them. The logic was sound, but Sophia knew that Victoria's capacity for creating chaos should never be underestimated. Still, the thought of walking into Victoria's moment of triumph with Alexander at her side was undeniably appealing. It would demonstrate that Sophia had not only survived Victoria's betrayal, but had emerged stronger and with better options. What would we tell people about our relationship? Sophia asked, already knowing that she was going to accept the invitation. The truth, Alexander replied, that we are exploring a personal connection while working together professionally, that we respect each other's intelligence and accomplishments, that we enjoy each other's company and want to see where that leads.
Sophia found herself smiling at the straightforward honesty of his approach. After years of navigating relationships where everything had to be carefully managed and strategically presented, Alexander's directness was refreshing. In that case, Sophia said, I'd be honored to attend the party with you. Alexander's answering smile was brilliant enough to make Sophia temporarily forget about the potential complications they were courting. Excellent. I'll pick you up at 7 on Saturday. After Alexander left, Sophia called her mother to inform her about the change in plans. Elena's reaction was immediate and predictable. Are you sure this is wise? Elena asked, her voice tight with concern. Victoria is going to see this as a provocation, and Richard will be caught in the middle of whatever drama ensues. I'm tired of making my decisions based on Victoria's potential reactions, Sophia replied, echoing Alexander's sentiment from earlier. If she chooses to create drama, that's her choice, but I'm not going to limit my life to avoid triggering her jealousy. Elena was quiet for a moment, and Sophia could hear the conflict in her mother's silence. Elena had spent 20 years trying to maintain peace in a blended family where one daughter consistently undermined the other, and Sophia's decision to stop accommodating Victoria's behavior would inevitably create the kind of open conflict that Elena had worked so hard to avoid. I understand why you're making this choice, Elena said finally, and I'm proud of you for refusing to be intimidated. Just be prepared for Victoria to retaliate in ways you might not anticipate. Sophia spent the next 2 days preparing for what she suspected would be one of the most challenging social events of her life. She selected a midnight blue gown that was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated enough to hold its own among the Rothschild family's social circle, but understated enough to avoid accusations of trying to upstage the bride-to-be. The engagement party was being held at the Rothschild family estate in the Hamptons, the same property where Sophia had spent an awkward weekend during her relationship with Marcus. The irony of returning as Alexander's date wasn't lost on her, but she found the symbolism empowering rather than uncomfortable. Alexander arrived at her apartment precisely at 7, wearing a midnight blue suit that complemented her gown perfectly. Sophia suspected the coordination wasn't accidental, and she appreciated his attention to details that would signal their unity to anyone paying attention. You look stunning, Alexander said as she opened the door, and the genuine appreciation in his voice made Sophia feel beautiful in a way that went beyond physical appearance. The drive to the Hamptons took 2 hours, providing ample time for conversation that ranged from lighthearted observations about the other guests they'd encounter to more serious discussions about how to handle potentially difficult situations.
Alexander's calm confidence was reassuring, and Sofia found herself looking forward to the evening rather than dreading it. The Rothschild estate was magnificent in the way that only generational wealth could achieve, with perfectly manicured grounds, strategically placed lighting, and architectural details that spoke of craftsmanship from an era when cost was never a consideration. Cars were lined up along the circular driveway, including several that Sofia recognized from her previous visit and many others that suggested tonight's fast list extended well beyond family and close friends. Alexander offered his arm as they approached the main entrance, a gesture that was both protective and possessive in ways that made Sofia's pulse quicken. She could see other guests noticing their arrival, and several people turned to get a better look at Alexander's unexpected companion. The main reception area was decorated with thousands of white roses and crystal chandeliers that cast elegant shadows across the marble floors. Victoria and Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting guests with the practiced grace of people who had been raised for exactly these kinds of social performances. Victoria looked radiant in a way that went beyond expensive styling and professional makeup. She was genuinely happy, glowing with the satisfaction of someone whose plans had exceeded even her own expectations. The engagement ring on her left hand was large enough to be seen from across the room, and she wore it with the confidence of someone who had finally secured everything she'd ever wanted. Marcus looked handsome and relaxed, more at ease than Sofia had ever seen him during their relationship. Whatever doubts he might have had about his choice had apparently been resolved, and he seemed genuinely content with the life he was building with Victoria. Sofia felt a moment of unexpected sadness, not for the loss of Marcus himself, but for the realization that he truly was happier with Victoria than he had ever been with her. It confirmed that their breakup had been the right decision for both of them, even if the way it had happened had been painful and humiliating. "Ready?" Alexander asked quietly, and Sofia realized they had paused just inside the entrance. "Ready," Sofia confirmed, and they moved forward to join the receiving line. Victoria's reaction to seeing Sofia approach with Alexander was everything Sofia had expected and more. Her radiant smile faltered for just a moment before being replaced by an expression of such complete shock that several nearby guests turned to see what had captured her attention. "Sofia," Victoria said, her voice carefully controlled but with undertones of disbelief, "what a surprise to see you here." "Thank you for including me in your celebration," replied graciously, refusing to acknowledge the barb. "Victoria, Marcus, I'd like you to meet my date, Alexander Rothschild." The introduction was perfectly polite and completely devastating. Victoria's face went through a series of expressions as she processed the implications of Sofia's words, while Marcus looked genuinely confused about how his brother had ended up at his engagement party with his ex-girlfriend. "Alexander," Marcus said, extending his hand with obvious bewilderment, "I didn't realize you were bringing anyone tonight." "Last-minute decision," Alexander replied smoothly, shaking his brother's hand with apparent warmth. "Sofia and I have been spending time together, and I thought she might enjoy seeing the family estate again." The casual reference to Sofia having been there before was a subtle reminder that she had a history with their family that predated Victoria's arrival, a detail that was clearly not lost on Victoria herself. "How lovely," Victoria managed, her social training allowing her to maintain appropriate responses even while her mind was obviously racing to understand this unexpected development. "I hope you both enjoy the evening." They moved past the receiving line into the main party area, where Sofia immediately became the focus of curious stares and whispered conversations. Alexander seemed completely unbothered by the attention, guiding her toward the bar with the easy confidence of someone who was accustomed to being watched at social events. "That went better than I expected," Sofia said, as Alexander ordered wine for both of them. "The night is young," Alexander replied with a smile that suggested he was actually enjoying the subtle chaos their arrival had created. They were approached almost immediately by Jonathan and Catherine Rothschild, Alexander's parents, who greeted Sofia with the kind of polite curiosity that wealthy families reserved for potential additions to their social circle. "Miss Chen," Catherine said, extending a perfectly manicured hand, "how nice to see you again. Alexander mentioned that you've built quite a successful technology company." "Guardian Analytics," Sofia confirmed, shaking hands with both parents. "Fascinating," Jonathan said, and his interest seemed genuine rather than merely polite.
The financial services industry desperately needs better security solutions. I imagine you're seeing tremendous growth in that market. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Alexander's parents asking intelligent questions about Sophia's business and seeming genuinely impressed by her answers. Sophia noticed that they treated her with considerably more respect than they had during her relationship with Marcus, when she had been viewed primarily as their younger son's girlfriend rather than as an accomplished professional in her own right. "We should probably circulate," Alexander said eventually, sensing that Sophia was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the intensity of the conversation. They moved through the party, with Alexander introducing Sophia to various family friends and business associates who seemed uniformly impressed by her accomplishments and charmed by her intelligence. Sophia found herself enjoying conversations about technology trends, business strategy, and economic policy with people who appreciated her expertise rather than tolerating it. The contrast with her experience at similar events during her relationship with Marcus was striking. Then, she had often felt like an outsider trying to prove she belonged, constantly aware that her background and achievements were being measured against standards she didn't fully understand. Tonight, with Alexander at her side, she felt like an equal participant rather than a guest seeking approval. They were discussing artificial intelligence applications with a group that included several venture capitalists and technology executives when Victoria appeared at Sophia's elbow with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sophia, could I steal you away for a moment?" Victoria asked sweetly. "I'd love to show you the gardens while they're still lit up." Sophia recognized the request as a command rather than an invitation, but she also understood that avoiding this conversation would only postpone the inevitable confrontation. "Of course," she agreed, excusing herself from the group while Alexander watched with obvious concern. The gardens were indeed beautifully illuminated, with strategically placed lights highlighting the elaborate landscaping and creating intimate spaces for private conversations. Victoria led Sophia to a secluded area near a fountain where they couldn't be overheard by other guests. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Victoria asked, dropping all pretense of sisterly affection. "I'm attending your engagement party with my date," Sophia replied calmly. "Is there something unclear about that?" "Don't play innocent with me," Victoria snapped. "You're here with Alexander to try to upstage me at my own party. It's pathetic and desperate, and everyone can see right through it." Sophia looked at her stepsister, noting the fury beneath Victoria's carefully maintained composure, and felt a surprising sense of pity rather than anger. "Victoria, I'm genuinely happy for you and Marcus. You got exactly what you wanted, and he seems content with his choice. Why can't that be enough?" "Because you can't stand that I won," Victoria replied, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and glanced around to make sure they weren't being observed. "You've always thought you were better than me, with your perfect grades and your precious little company. But I got Marcus, and now you're trying to console yourself with his brother." The accusation revealed more about Victoria's insecurities than Sophia's motivations, but Sophia recognized that rational explanations wouldn't penetrate Victoria's need to view everything as a competition between them. "Alexander and I met through business," Sophia said simply. "Our relationship has nothing to do with you or Marcus." "Please," Victoria scoffed. "You expect me to believe that it's just a coincidence that you ended up with another Rothschild? That you're not trying to prove some point about being able to get whatever I have?" Sophia studied Victoria's face, seeing the genuine pain beneath the anger and manipulation. Her stepsister had spent so many years competing with Sophia that she couldn't conceive of a world where Sophia's choices weren't reactions to her own decisions. "Victoria, I understand why you see everything as competition between us," Sophia said gently, "but I promise you, my relationship with Alexander has nothing to do with proving points or winning games. I care about him as a person, not as a symbol of anything else." "I don't believe you," Victoria said flatly, "and I'm not going to let you ruin my engagement party with my own drama you're planning to create." "I'm not planning to create any drama," Sophia assured her. "I'm here to celebrate your happiness and to enjoy an evening with someone I care about. That's all." Victoria stared at Sophia for a long moment, clearly struggling to process this response that didn't fit her expectations of how their confrontation should unfold. She had prepared for anger, defensiveness, or competitive declarations, but Sophia's calm sincerity seemed to deflate her anticipated arguments.
"This isn't over," Victoria said finally, apparently unable to formulate a more specific threat. "It doesn't have to be anything," Sofia replied. "You won, Victoria. You got Marcus, you're marrying into an incredible family, and you have everything you wanted. Why can't that be enough without needing me to be miserable about it?" Victoria turned and walked back toward the party without answering, leaving Sofia alone in the garden to process what had just happened. The confrontation had revealed something important. Victoria's need for Sofia to be unhappy was more important to her than her own happiness. The engagement to Marcus wasn't just about loving him, it was about beating Sofia in their lifelong competition. Sofia found the realization both sad and liberating. She had spent years wondering what she could do differently to improve her relationship with Victoria, but tonight had confirmed that Victoria's hostility wasn't really about Sofia's actions or achievements. It was about Victoria's fundamental inability to measure her own worth without comparing it to someone else's. Alexander appeared beside her as she stood looking at the fountain, his presence both comforting and reassuring. "Everything okay?" he asked, though his expression suggested he'd been watching the conversation from a distance. "Better than okay," Sofia said, surprising herself with how true the statement felt. "I think I finally understand something that's been confusing me for years." "Care to share?" Sofia considered how to explain the revelation that had crystallized during her conversation with Victoria. "I spent so long thinking that Victoria's behavior toward me was personal, that I had done something to earn her hostility. But tonight I realized that her need to compete with me isn't really about me at all. It's about how she sees herself."
Alexander nodded thoughtfully. Some people can only feel successful by making others feel unsuccessful. It's an exhausting way to live. Exactly, Sofia agreed, and I'm tired of letting her emotional needs dictate my choices. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the fountain and the distant sounds of the party. Sofia felt a sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in years, as if some weight she'd been carrying had finally been lifted. "Ready to go back inside?" Alexander asked. "I was hoping you'd dance with me." Sofia smiled, feeling genuinely excited about the prospect. "I'd love to." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, dancing, and subtle observations of family dynamics that were playing out around them. Marcus seemed genuinely happy, but also somewhat relieved that Sofia appeared to have moved on from their relationship. Jonathan and Catherine Rothschild continued to treat Sofia with warmth and respect, apparently viewing her as a welcome addition to their son's life. Victoria maintained her composure throughout the party, playing the role of gracious hostess while shooting occasional venomous looks in Sofia's direction. But her earlier confidence had been replaced by something that looked more like uncertainty, as if Sofia's unexpected poise had disrupted her understanding of how their relationship was supposed to work. The most telling moment came during the traditional toasts, when Marcus spoke about finding love in unexpected places, and Victoria thanked everyone for celebrating their happiness. Sofia listened to their words and felt genuinely glad that they had found contentment with each other, even if the way it had happened had been painful for her. When Alexander was called upon to toast his brother, Sofia held her breath, wondering how he would navigate the complex dynamics that were swirling around the room. "To Marcus and Victoria," Alexander said, raising his glass with apparent warmth, "may you find in each other everything you've been looking for, and may your happiness together be as genuine as it appears tonight." The toast was perfectly appropriate and subtly pointed, acknowledging their happiness while hinting that some relationships are based on what people are seeking rather than who they truly are. Sofia suspected that only she caught the deeper meaning, but Alexander's words felt like a public validation of everything she had concluded about her own relationship with Marcus. The evening ended with Sofia feeling triumphant in ways that had nothing to do with competition or victory over Victoria. She had faced her most challenging family dynamic with grace and honesty. She had demonstrated her ability to move beyond past relationships to something potentially much more meaningful, and she had learned something important about her own worth that didn't depend on other people's approval or disapproval. As Alexander drove her home through the quiet Long Island night, Sofia reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. Guardian Analytics was about to receive the investment that would transform it into a global leader in financial security.
She was developing a relationship with someone who appreciated her intelligence and ambitions rather than seeing them as obstacles to overcome. And most importantly, she had finally freed herself from the need to manage Victoria's emotions or reactions. "Thank you," Sofia said as they pulled up to her apartment building. "For what?" Alexander asked, though his smile suggested he knew what she meant. "For tonight. For the way you handled everything. For showing me that I don't have to choose between personal happiness and professional success." Alexander turned off the engine and shifted to face her fully. "Sofia, I want you to understand something. I didn't ask you to attend the party tonight to make a statement about Victoria or Marcus or family dynamics. I asked you because I wanted to spend the evening with you, and I wanted to introduce you to my family as someone who's becoming important to me." The declaration was direct and honest, in ways that made Sofia's heart race with anticipation and possibility. "How important?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Alexander reached across the center console to take her hand, his fingers warm and steady against her palm. "Important enough that I've been thinking about you constantly for weeks. Important enough that I want to explore what this could become between us. Important enough that I'm willing to deal with whatever complications arise because I think you're worth it." Sofia looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity and determination that reminded her of her own approach to building Guardian Analytics. Alexander wasn't someone who made commitments lightly, but when he decided something was worth pursuing, he did so with complete focus and dedication. "I feel the same way," Sofia said simply, and the relief she saw in Alexander's expression told her that he had been less certain of her feelings than his confident exterior had suggested. Alexander leaned forward to kiss her, and Sofia felt the same sense of rightness that she experienced when solving complex technological problems or closing important business deals. This was what partnership was supposed to feel like: two strong people choosing to build something together rather than one person compromising their strength to accommodate the other's weaknesses. When they finally broke apart, Sofia was smiling in a way that felt entirely natural and unguarded. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we see where this takes us," Alexander replied. "Together." The following Monday brought news that confirmed Sofia's intuition about the evening's significance. The partnership agreement with Pinnacle Ventures was finalized, providing Guardian Analytics with the resources to become a global leader in financial security technology. More importantly, several major corporations that had heard about the partnership were requesting meetings to discuss enterprise-level implementations of Sofia's fraud detection system. Victoria's engagement party had inadvertently become a networking opportunity that would accelerate Guardian Analytics' growth by months, simply because Sofia had been introduced to influential people as Alexander's partner rather than as Marcus's ex-girlfriend. The difference in how she was perceived and treated had opened doors that might have remained closed for years. The personal relationship with Alexander developed with the same steady confidence that characterized his business decisions. They spent evenings discussing everything from artificial intelligence ethics to classical music composition, and Sofia found herself challenged intellectually in ways that made her feel like herself than she had in years. 3 months later, Guardian Analytics announced its expansion into European markets, with offices planned for London, Frankfurt, and Amsterdam. The company's valuation had tripled since the partnership with Pinnacle Ventures, and Sofia was being featured on magazine covers as one of the technology industry's most promising young leaders. Victoria's wedding was covered extensively in the society pages, with photos of her elaborate gown and descriptions of the exclusive guest list. Sofia sent a thoughtful wedding gift and a gracious note, genuinely hoping that Victoria would find the happiness and security she had always sought. The most satisfying moment came 6 months after the engagement party, when Sofia received a call from Marcus asking if she would consider providing cybersecurity consulting for a new business venture he was developing. The conversation was professional and friendly, with no trace of the awkwardness that had characterized their earlier interactions. "I always knew you were brilliant," Marcus said during their meeting to discuss his security needs.
I'm glad you found someone who appreciates that about you. Sofia thanked him for the compliment while recognizing it as his way of acknowledging that their relationship had ended for the right reasons. Marcus had needed someone who would support his vision of their life together, while Sofia had needed someone who would support her vision of what she could become on her own. Alexander had proven to be that person in ways that continued to surprise and delight her. He celebrated her professional achievements with genuine pride, challenged her thinking when she needed different perspectives, and supported her ambitions without trying to redirect them toward his own priorities.
Their relationship became public knowledge when they attended a technology conference together where Sofia was delivering the keynote address. Alexander introduced himself to reporters as Sofia's partner, both personally and through Pinnacle Ventures, and spoke eloquently about her contributions to financial security innovation. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, focusing on Sofia's achievements and the strategic partnership that was transforming Guardian Analytics into a global leader. Several articles noted the irony of Sofia's romantic relationship with her former boyfriend's brother, but the business success overshadowed any suggestion of impropriety or strategic manipulation. Victoria's reaction to the news coverage was predictably bitter, but Sofia found that she no longer cared about her stepsister's opinions or emotional needs. Victoria had gotten everything she claimed to want. What she did with that success was her own responsibility. The final validation came a year after the engagement party, when Guardian Analytics was selected as the primary cybersecurity provider for the European Central Bank, a contract worth over $200 million and representing the largest deal in the company's history. Sofia signed the agreement in the company's new London headquarters, with Alexander watching proudly from the conference room where the ceremony was being held. That evening, as they celebrated with champagne on the terrace of their hotel overlooking the Thames, Alexander presented Sofia with a ring that was both beautiful and meaningful in ways that went beyond its monetary value. "This isn't about competing with anyone or proving any points," Alexander said. "This is about two people who found each other and decided to build something extraordinary together." Sofia looked at the ring, then at Alexander, and felt the same certainty she had experienced when starting Guardian Analytics. This was right in ways that went beyond logic or strategy. It was right because it honored who she was while creating space for who she could become. "Yes," Sofia said simply, and Alexander's answering smile was brilliant enough to rival the city lights spread out below them. Their engagement announcement was featured in both technology and society publications, with articles highlighting Sofia's business achievements and the couple's shared commitment to supporting emerging entrepreneurs. The coverage was respectful and admiring, focusing on their individual accomplishments and their collaborative approach to building both personal and professional partnerships. Victoria's response was a brief congratulations card that was polite but cool, exactly what Sofia had expected from someone who had finally realized that her victory over Sofia had been Pyrrhic at best. Victoria had gotten Marcus, but Sofia had gotten something much more valuable, a partner who enhanced her strengths rather than asking her to diminish them. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring, with plans for a celebration that would honor both families while reflecting Sofia and Alexander's shared values and interests. Sofia found herself looking forward to the event not as a social performance, but as a genuine celebration of finding someone who understood that love was about supporting each other's dreams rather than requiring sacrifices of them. As Sofia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, she realized that Victoria's cruelest betrayal had ultimately become the catalyst for Sofia's greatest happiness. Losing Marcus had created space for finding Alexander, and learning to stop accommodating Victoria's manipulation had given Sofia the confidence to pursue what she truly wanted rather than settling for what seemed safe or acceptable. Guardian Analytics continued to grow and innovate, with Sofia maintaining her role as CEO while also serving on the boards of several technology companies focused on artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Alexander's support never wavered, and his pride in her achievements was evident to everyone who met them together. The most profound realization was that Sofia had finally learned the difference between being successful and being happy. Success was about achievements and recognition, but happiness was about finding people who celebrated your victories without diminishing your dreams. Alexander had given her that gift, just as she had given it to him through her unwavering support of his venture capital work and his philanthropic interests. 3 years after Victoria's engagement party, Sofia stood in her corner office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, reading a proposal for Guardian Analytics' expansion into Asia-Pacific markets. The company now employed over 300 people across 4 continents, with technology that was protecting financial institutions representing trillions of dollars. Alexander appeared in her doorway, as he often did when his schedule allowed him to stop by her office between meetings. "How's the proposal looking?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Promising," Sofia replied, setting aside the documents to focus on her husband.
The Singapore government is very interested in our new blockchain verification system. That's fantastic, Alexander said, and his genuine excitement about her work still made Sofia smile even after years of marriage. When would implementation begin? If we sign the contract, probably next quarter, Sofia said, which means I'll be traveling to Asia fairly frequently over the next 6 months. I'll miss you, Alexander said simply, but I'm excited for you. This could establish Guardian Analytics as the global standard for financial security. Sofia looked at her husband, feeling the same sense of gratitude and amazement that struck her regularly when she considered how dramatically her life had changed since that phone call from Marcus announcing his engagement to Victoria. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating at the time had actually freed her to become the person she was meant to be, both personally and professionally. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, apparently noticing her thoughtful expression. "Just appreciating how everything worked out," Sofia said. "Victoria thought she was taking something away from me, but she actually gave me the push I needed to find something much better." Alexander smiled, understanding immediately what she meant. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create space for the best things that could happen to us. Sofia nodded, looking out at the city where she had built her company and found her partner, feeling profound satisfaction with the choices she had made and the life she had created. Victoria's prediction that she would die poor and alone was spectacularly wrong, but more importantly, Sofia had learned that her worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions or validation. Guardian Analytics would continue to grow and innovate, changing how financial institutions protected themselves against increasingly sophisticated threats. Sofia and Alexander would continue building their life together, supporting each other's dreams while creating new ones to pursue together. And Victoria would continue living with the consequences of her choices, just as Sofia was living with the rewards of hers. The story had ended exactly as it should have, with the person who had worked hardest and treated others with the most integrity emerging victorious, not through manipulation or betrayal, but through talent, determination, and the courage to pursue what she truly wanted rather than settling for what others thought she deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.